Hello friends and welcome back. So on this channel we've been doing this thing where I put on some makeup while I recount or tell you guys a story, a true crime story, or a case that I've been interested in and I've been reading up on. You guys really seem to be enjoying these videos, and of course they are heavily inspired by Bailey Sarian. Now if you don't know who Bailey Sarian is, you have to stop this video right now. I'm ordering you to pause, back it up, and go to her channel, and I will leave her link down below so you guys can go check her out because she's awesome and I want to be her friend so bad. I will leave just the names of the products that I'm using in the description box because a couple of you have been asking me what I'm wearing, but I feel like stopping the video or pausing the story and like explaining what I'm doing or explaining what I'm using like product wise would just kind of pull you out of the zone. Do you know what I mean? So I'll leave them in the hibbity jibbity down there. Okay, let's get started. I don't know what I'm doing today. What should I do as I look? I don't know. I have so many things here that I want to try. Maybe I should do something natural, schnatural. Or maybe not. So this case, as I was researching it, and I don't really recall like how I found out about this case, but as soon as I started researching this case, I just got so drawn in to the psychology behind it because it's actually one of the cases that has brought upon like this huge study, like psychological study, and essentially sociological study, and that sort of stuff just really interests me in general. So as soon as I started getting into this case, I was like, yep, I want to cover this ASAP. By the way, let me know if you like this lighting situation, this setup. This isn't gonna be permanent, but I just want to know if you guys enjoy this kind of lighting thing. I bought a ring light specifically so that I can film in this room and not in the studio, because then I'd have to bring heaps and heaps and heaps of makeup into the studio, and that's just like, no. So, anywho. So, Catherine Susan, or Kitty Genovese, and just as a side note, I've seen lots of people who have covered this case mispronounce her last name. I don't know if that's done on purpose or if her family like Americanized her last name, but she was Italian American, so her last name is Italian. And I don't know if this was a mispronunciation on their part or if this was an Americanized version of her name. I know, being that I'm also a child of two Italian Canadian parents, which immigrated from Italy when I was pretty young to Canada. Side note, again, I'm getting sidetracked, but I did move back to Italy in my 20s. But anyway, my parents did like Americanize or Northern Americanize our last name, just so that it would be easier for people to visualize our last name if you have to like be on the phone to someone, and instead of saying it the way that we would pronounce it normally, they kind of like Americanized it, you know, so people could understand it better. You know what I mean. If you're like an immigrant of any kind, you'll know what I mean. Sorry for the rant. We're getting back into it. No problem. So Kitty was born on July 7th, 1935. She was born in Brooklyn, and she was the oldest of 5 children to parents Rachel and Vincent Genovese. So she was raised Catholic and grew up in this area in Western Brooklyn where there were mostly Italian American and Irish American families, like immigrants. If you've ever seen like A Bronx Tale or, you know, movies like that kind of area. And she attended an all-girl high school and was described as being really, really mature for her age, and she was always very upbeat, sunny, and, you know, just very wise beyond her years. Now, I couldn't find tons and tons and tons of information like in her backstory, but I did find out that when she was living in Brooklyn, her mom actually witnessed a murder, and that prompted her family to move to New Canaan, Connecticut in 1954, but she didn't move with them. She actually stayed in Brooklyn with her grandparents because she was apparently getting married and she had to stay in town to prepare for her upcoming marriage. However, later that year, the couple actually got their marriage annulled. I didn't find any information about the guy's name or anything like that, and it's not really pertinent to the story, so let's just say that the two of them just didn't get along as husband and wife, and so they got their marriage annulled. But keep this in mind because I think that it might be relevant afterwards. I'm not quite sure, but just keep in mind that she did get an annulled marriage at one point. So after her marriage didn't work out, she moved to her own apartment in Brooklyn, and she worked a couple of clerical jobs, like desk jobs, but she found them kind of boring and unappealing, so they didn't last very long. But by the late 50s, she actually started bartending, which she found to be super fun, and she really enjoyed doing that. In August of 1961, she was actually arrested for a really short period of time because she was bookmaking or like taking bets from patrons at the bar, which was illegal. And she and her girlfriend Di Guarnieri were fined $50 and she lost her job. But honestly, the fact that she got arrested and fined didn't really faze her because afterwards she got another job as a bartender and moved her way on up. Like, she became the manager of this bar, and by working double shifts, she was able to save up a bunch of money, and she intended actually to open up her own Italian restaurant with that money. She shared an apartment with girlfriend Mary Ann Zialonco. I think that's how you pronounce it. And remember when I told you guys to keep in mind that she had gotten an annulment from her marriage? Well, there's a ton of speculation going around that basically she was a lesbian or a closeted lesbian, because keep in mind these are the late 50s, early 60s, and this was like extremely taboo to be like gay or out or whatever. In all the documentaries and all the news articles that I read about this case, they all seem to be insinuating that her and Marianne were lovers. But honestly, I don't really think that's anybody's business if she was or if she wasn't, and it's not really relevant to this case because what happened to her had nothing to do with, you know, prejudice or anything like that. So if you're thinking that's what happened, no. So at approximately 2:30 a.m. she finishes her shift. Keep in mind she works as a bartender, so she's out there doing her thing till pretty late. And she heads into the parking lot to go to her car, and she hops into her car, which is this red Fiat, and she is on her way, you know, heading home. So here's the part where, you know, it gets oogie boogie. So while she is waiting for the light to change on Hoover Avenue, you know, she's sitting in her car, waiting for the light to change like a good citizen does, and she is spotted by someone sitting in their car, watching her. And this guy was called Winston Mosley. So a little bit about Winston Mosley. He is a married man, and he had 3 children, I believe. And why was he out so late, you know, in a parked car just watching for people, you might ask? You know, what is a man like that, you know, family man doing out there? And he was scouting for people to murder. So at the traffic light, the light turns green and everything, and Winston turns on his engine and starts following Kitty back to her apartment. Now, to explain Kitty's apartment complex to you, because it's very, very important to the story, it's kind of like extremely sketchy, if I can use that as like a way to describe it. Basically, it's like beside this train station kind of platform thing, and she had to park beyond the station. Basically, it's situated in front of or near the Kew Gardens Long Island railway station, and she uses that parking lot to park because her apartment complex is like 300 meters away or in front of this railway station. So she parks her car and she's heading towards her apartment, and her apartment complex is like kind of strange in the sense that the entrance isn't right there in front of the apartment. Like there's like doors obviously, but she has to go around the back of the building to get into the entrance of her apartment. Like that's how you get into her apartment, which is horrible. Like she has to go through an alley to get to the entrance door to get into her apartment. That's just sketchy. Like honestly, I'd be crapping my pants every single time I had to go home, especially at that time of night. I mean, she works late nights and it's just anything can happen, and nothing ever did. So it was kind of like a normal day or night for her, but this time something did happen. So anyway, Kitty parks her car and is going towards her building, and Mosley parks his car close or nearby and follows her towards her apartment complex. And as Kitty is picking up speed because she can kind of sense this guy behind her, he pulls out this hunting knife, and she catches a glimpse of it and starts like bolting towards her apartment building, which any of us would. And this is the part of the story where the psychological aspects of it really fascinated me like a lot. So basically, he overtook her and she ran towards the front of the building because she figured, more people had access towards the front of the building than the back of the building, where nobody would be able to see her if something did happen. And he stabbed her twice in the back, and she yelled out at the top of her lungs, "Oh my God, he stabbed me, help, help, help." And several neighbors heard her cry for help, but literally nobody came down to help her. One neighbor called Robert Moser actually popped his head out his window and said, "Hey, leave that girl alone." But he didn't come down to like help her in any way. Just so weird. But since this guy did yell out from the front of his window, Winston Mosley actually got scared and bolted. Like he got out of there so fast. And you'd think, okay, great, the guy's gone. Someone surely will come downstairs and help this poor girl, since the coast is clear and all. But nobody did. Nobody came downstairs to help her. I mean, she was stabbed pretty badly in the back, and she was on the floor, and nobody did anything. Nobody went downstairs, nobody came down, nobody did anything. That guy who yelled out didn't come down either. Like it just radio silence, you guys. Nobody did anything. Nobody came downstairs, nobody helped, nothing. The funny part is that there were witnesses, and lots of the articles that I read actually said that there were 37 to 38 witnesses who just witnessed this brutal crime and nobody did anything. There were certain witnesses who testified and said that Mosley got into his car and then drove away, so everyone thought the coast was clear. But then he returned after 10 minutes. He came back after 10 minutes and he had on this hat, like this giant wide brimmed hat, and he was searching everywhere for Kitty. He was searching the parking lot, by the train station, in the front of the building, on the sides of the building, and then he found her, and she was at the back of the building because after he left, she was going towards the entrance to her apartment so she could call for help. Keep in mind, these are the 60s, so no cell phones, just, house phones. So I'm pretty sure she was going home to call for help since nobody came downstairs to help her. Eventually Mosley found her lying in a hallway at the back of her apartment complex, where a locked door actually prevented her from going inside. She was in and out of consciousness, but unfortunately, being that she was at the back of her building and this time nobody would be able to even see her or hear her, whereas at the front of the building at least there were some witnesses, she was out of view. And basically Mosley took this opportunity to assault her, basically, rape her and stab her several more times. And then he stole $49 from her and left. The attack itself lasted approximately half an hour, and after he'd left, one of Kitty's neighbors, which was called Sophia Farrar, actually found Kitty in the hallway, and she saw that she was barely holding on. She had knife wounds on her hands, which suggested that she did fight back, with all her might. And Sophia decided to stay by Kitty's side and tried to make her as comfortable as she could in her last moments of life, basically. This case actually took place 4 years before New York City implemented the 911 system. So you know how now we have dispatch and people working the phones to answer your calls, and then that goes out to police and all that. So basically nowadays what happens is dispatch gets a call from a person in need, and then they transfer that to like the nearest police in the area, and then you know how it works. You know how police work. But back in the day, calls to the police weren't given high priority, and they were unclear and kind of like there aren't very many records of them. Like nowadays we have records and everything is recorded just in case something happens and we have to like attack the dispatcher. But back in the day it was just kind of like wishy-washy. One witness did say that his father did call 911 and reported a woman that got beat up and was staggering around the front of the building. But of course there are no records to prove that that did happen. A few minutes after the final attack, a man called Carl Ross actually called his friend to ask on advice on what to do instead of calling the police. Then his friend called another friend saying like, oh, what should we do? And that friend called the police, who arrived at the scene of the crime within minutes. So literally, if anyone called the police the instant that Kitty got stabbed the first time, those 40 minutes prior, she would have still been alive. Which is what leads me to question that first guy who said his father called the police station. Because surely if he did call, like, the police would have come. Unless he said that she got beat up and that wasn't as high of a priority as being stabbed. I'm not sure about that one. Kitty was picked up by an ambulance at around 4:15 a.m. and unfortunately she died on the way to the hospital in the ambulance. And if you think about it, all of this could have been avoided if someone had just called the police. I am very doubtful that that first man did call the police when his son said that he did. Because honestly, because that friend of a friend of a friend of whatever had to call the police from wherever he wasn't even in the area. And like, if you have to call someone for advice on what to do after you just witnessed someone being stabbed, I have no words for you, honestly. You call your friend and ask for advice. This woman just got stabbed in front of my apartment. What should I do? Hang up the phone and call the police. No? So now let me just get into a little bit about Winston Mosley, even though he does not deserve a segment at all in this video, but I feel like it's important to get a little bit of backstory in these things. So he was 29 years old at the time, like when he committed this murder, and like I said, he was married and he had 3 children and he had no prior criminal record. Now this is the part that kind of pisses me off just as much as the other part, because a lot of things in this case really twist me in a knot. Kind of half of them are fascinating and the other half are just like mind-boggling, because while in custody, Winston Mosley actually confessed to the murder. And when they asked him, you know, why did you kill her, you know, he said he just wanted to kill a woman. That was his motive. Just, you know, casual 3 a.m. thought in his head. Let me just go out there and just murder. This is the part where I personally think he has done this before, because he specified that he preferred to kill women because they were less powerful and less strong, and they couldn't fight back as well as men could. So why would he say that he preferred to kill women unless he has done it before? Like, that's just an odd thing to say. No? So I'm thinking in my head, that he'd done this before. You know what I mean? He said that he got up at around 2 a.m. and he left his wife and kids to just drive around Queens and look for a victim. You know, that doesn't sound like somebody who has done this for the first time, and it's like kind of like getting up for a midnight stack, just like, you know what I'm gonna do tonight? I feel like getting some ice cream. No, that's you getting up and being like, can't sleep, gonna go murder someone. So then I researched even more, right? And I saw that afterwards, when he was questioned again, he actually confessed to murdering and assaulting another 2 women. So I was like, I'm like a criminal profiler at this point in my life. Like, I feel like I can get in the brain of these guys, into the brains of them. And how did he get arrested in the first place, you might ask? Well, he was actually caught right after he burgled like this house, and he stole this TV. And then the police saw this TV in his car, and the car matched the description that witnesses saw at Kitty's crime scene, basically. So that's how he got caught, because of a TV that he stole. Mosley was charged with Kitty's murder, but not charged with the other 2 that he admitted to, because another man had actually admitted to murdering one of the women that he murdered. So they were kind of like, can we really take anything that this guy says seriously at this point? Probably not. However, I do still heavily believe that this was not his first go, because you don't just wake up one morning at like 2 in the morning and just have an urge to kill. It doesn't work like that, in my opinion. Again, I'm not a psychologist or anything, but I just think that's not how it works. Don't come for me. He initially pleaded to not guilty, but then he changed his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity, which kind of strange because he scored 135 on an IQ test that the psychologists performed on him. So then again, smart people can be crazy too. So I guess I don't know what I'm talking about. Don't come for me. The judge on the case was called Erwin Shapiro, and on June 15th, 1964, he sentenced Winston Mosley to death. When the jury foreman read the sentence, he showed no emotion, no reaction, kind of just stared blankly. And Judge Shapiro said, and I quote, "I don't believe in capital punishment, but when I see a monster like this, I wouldn't hesitate to pull the switch myself." And honestly, same. On June 1st, 1967, the New York Court of Appeals found that Mosley should have been able to argue that he was medically insane at the time of the sentencing, when the trial court found him to be legally sane. Like in all cases, the defendant should still have time with their lawyers, etc., to come up with backup or whatever reasons why they're insane, or reasons why they did so and so and whatever, but they didn't have the chance to bring in like a rebuttal. So his sentence was actually reduced from capital punishment, which is being sentenced to death, to lifetime in prison, just because things weren't done the way they should have been done in court. Here's some interesting bonus info. On March 18th, 1968, Mosley actually escaped from prison while being transported from Mayer Memorial Hospital in Buffalo, New York, where he had gone in for some minor surgery because of a self-inflicted harm. And so he broke out of the transportation vehicle doohickey that they have. He hit the correctional officer, stole his weapon, and then fled to a nearby vacant house owned by a New York couple called Mr. and Mrs. Kaluga. And he stayed there undetected for 3 days until March 21st, when the Kalugas went to go visit the house, check on it and everything, and they encountered Mosley, which held them hostage for over an hour. He bound and gagged Matthew Kaluga and raped his wife, and then he stole their car and fled. He then traveled to Grand Island, and on March 22nd, he broke into another house and held a woman and her daughter hostage for 2 hours before releasing them unharmed. He didn't touch them, decided not to. And then he surrendered to the police voluntarily, and he was charged with escape and kidnapping, which he pleaded guilty to, and he was awarded an additional 15 years to his already life in prison sentence. I don't understand why he was not also charged with the rape of that woman. Honestly, this man, he then became eligible for parole in 1984, and I swear to God, I can't with this man at all. He said, and I quote, "For a victim outside, it's a 1 time or 1 hour or 1 minute affair, but for the person who's caught, it's forever." Are you serious? Are you freaking kidding me? Does this man not understand that it's also forever for the person that you're psychologically harming and physically harming? And at the same hearing, Mosley claimed he never intended to kill Kitty. He considered her murder to be a mugging because people kill people when they mug sometimes. People kill people when they mug accidentally, yeah. And also they accidentally rape them too, and then stab them several more times after the stealing of the money. Okay. the board obviously saw right through his shit and denied his parole. He returned for another parole hearing on March 13th, 2008, on the 44th anniversary of Kitty's murder. He continued to show like no remorse for her murder at all, and he was denied parole for the 15th time on November of 2015, and he died in prison on March 28th, 2016, at the age of 81. He served 52 years, making him one of the longest-serving inmates in the New York State prison system. Now, let's quickly touch on the psychology behind all of this, because that's what really fascinates me, and that's what really wanted me to cover this case in the first place. So basically, because of this case, the case actually prompted for a whole series of tests to be done, and analysis and psychological evaluations. Basically, Kitty's murder became a staple in American psychology textbooks following her case over the course of the next couple of years. And basically, they called it the bystander effect. And this is huge. I've heard of it before, but I never knew that it derived specifically from a murder case. To put it in layman's terms, what the bystander effect is, essentially, is that the more people there are around you, like the more people there are physically, the less likely it is for someone to step up and do something, because they just assume that someone else will do it. In the case of Kitty Genovese, what happened was that news reporters and articles started claiming that there were at least 37 to 38 people who witnessed the murder, or at least heard something. Now, it hasn't been like fully, looked into and confirmed. It's just kind of speculation, but there were many people who did see something happen, i.e. the man, Robert Moser, who saw what was happening and yelled out his window, "Hey, let that girl alone." So there were people who had witnessed or saw or, kind of were peeking through their window and kind of just curious to see what was happening. But there were lots of inaccuracies in this, because consider that all of this had taken place in New York, city that never sleeps, hustle and bustle, people yelling, children screaming, cars honking all the time, people being a little bit more exaggerated, I guess. Like, for example, one of the witnesses had said that they just kind of thought that it was a couple, just screaming and yelling, and the woman was just being a little bit more exaggerated, trying to scare the guy off. Maybe that had happened before, and so everyone kind of just assumed that it was like another one of those incidents where he wasn't really stabbing her, it was just kind of a way to get him to leave. Or, maybe they thought she was being abused at home and she kind of had it and kicked him out of the house. Like, a lot of theories have come about this story. But basically, the psychological thing about the bystander effect really, really got to me, because I started thinking about this and just kind of because I just started thinking, as I do, why is it that when there's a group of people, it's less likely for someone to do something, and then if it's just like one person sees an attack or something happening, they're more likely to help? Why is that? Because in my head, I'm thinking to myself, isn't it more likely that if you're in a big group of people, you feel like stronger, like there's strength in numbers? Like, there are 38 of us and only one of him, let's all go downstairs and show him a piece of our minds, instead of... Do you know what I mean? Like, wouldn't it just be more awkward for one person to, feel the strength or the courage to go up to someone and be like, "Hey, you leave her alone"? Like, I would just feel more iffy about putting myself forward if there was absolutely no one else around, because I feel like then that person could just turn around and attack me instead. Whereas if, there were a bunch of us all together, I would just feel a little bit more courageous and brave, and I don't know, do you know what I mean? Like, it's just a little bit, what is this bystander effect? And why does it make not so much sense in my brain? Or am I just overthinking it? Let me know down below if you're agreeing with me or if you think, like, what is your opinion? I want to know because I'm very curious about this. I've been overthinking this a little too much, I think. Yeah. So this was the case of Kitty Genovese and the terrible tragedy that became of her. If you guys are into this kind of stuff and you want to see me put on more makeup and talk about true crime, let me know down below, and also request your cases because I want to hear what you guys want to hear about next. Yeah, have a good one, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.